In 1961, a new voice cut through late-night radio. Bright, high, and uneasy, the singer called himself Del Shannon. The single was Runaway. Within weeks, it had reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it held there for 4 consecutive weeks. That piercing solo wasn't a guitar or a saxophone. It was called the Musitron, a customized claveline designed and played by Shannon's bandmate, Max Crook. Nobody else had a Musitron. They recorded Runaway at Bell Sound in New York. The release take dates to January 21st, 1961, and it was issued as a single just under a month later on February 18th.
As I walk along, I wonder what went wrong with our love, a love that was so strong.
Contemporary accounts and later studio histories note the part's distinctive, slightly sped-up feel due to the Musitron's unique sound. At a time when portable transistor radios were becoming very popular and expanding the youth audience for music, a song like Runaway could become a hit quickly and feel like it belonged to everyone all at once.
I wonder, I wonder why she ran away, and I wonder where she will stay, my little runaway.
But Del Shannon wasn't even his real name. Shannon had been born as Charles Westover in western Michigan, learned the ukulele before learning guitar, and absorbed the plain-spoken storytelling of songwriters like Hank Williams, Hank Snow, and Lefty Frizzell. A country sensibility that he would carry into his own songs, as he became one of the first singer-songwriters in rock and roll history, and spent a lifetime running away from himself and chasing the perfect song.
In the rain, tears are falling and I feel a pain, wishing you were here by me to end this misery. And I
wonder. Charles Weedon Westover came into the world at the end of 1934 in West Michigan farm country. Some accounts place his birth at a Grand Rapids hospital. Others list Coopersville as his birthplace. Either way, he grew up in Coopersville, a small town just west of Grand Rapids, in a household headed by Bert and Leone Westover, his parents. Coopersville in those years was a tight, work-first community with deep Dutch Protestant farming roots. The pace was steady, the expectations clear. You helped, you kept your word, and you did your part. That setting, practical, modest, formed the ground Del Shannon would always stand on, even when the spotlight found him. Music entered through the front door. Leone Westover showed her son the basics on a ukulele. Before long, he was teaching himself guitar, drawn to the plain-spoken storytelling of Hank Williams, Hank Snow, and Lefty Frizzell. Country voices that made small feelings sound big. By his early teens, Charles Westover was playing regularly, working out chords by ear and wearing down records on the family player. Like a lot of kids in post-war America, Charles listened on portable radios and at school events. The growing youth audience, made larger by cheap receivers and stackable singles, was starting to reshape the business of music. For a boy in a small town, it meant the wider world felt a little closer to home than it had to his parents. Work came early. West Michigan mixed agriculture with small industry. Families stitched together incomes however they could, and kids learned reliability fast. Charles carried that into his musical habits, practicing nightly, keeping charts neat, and showing up on time for any chance he got to play. The people who knew him later often mentioned the same thing. He was serious about the work of music. By the early 1950s, Charles Westover had the pieces that would define him: a melodic ear, a taste for minor keys, and a way of singing that lifted at the end of a line, like a thought you didn't quite want to lose. None of it looked like a career yet, but the shape of Del Shannon was already there, inside a Michigan kid named Charles. At the age of 14, he had bought a Sears guitar that rarely left his side, and classmates remembered him as the class musician. He listened to country singles, but also to bands like the Ink Spots, borrowing their falsetto glide, a vocal color that he would keep for life. Charlie, as everyone called him, graduated in 1953 and picked up odd jobs around town. He'd already met Shirley Nash in high school, and they married young. The music kept building in the background, practice first, then any stage that would have him. As a teenager, he played wherever he could: school events, community rooms, and he sometimes sang for kids at the children's home. The rooms were small, but he learned how to hold attention and finish clean. Through the early 50s, listening habits were changing. 45 RPM singles and cheaper players let teenagers choose their own music at home, and by the mid-50s, transistor radios made it portable, part of why small-town kids could follow the big city sounds. But for Charles Westover, soon the Army came calling. Sources differ on the exact year. Some say 1954, others 1956. But all agree he shipped out to Germany, where he would play constantly and learn how to front a band. The Army put him to steady use. He won notice in the 7th Army Amateur Talent Contest, earned time on the Get Up and Go radio program, and fronted a bass combo that worked German venues on off hours. Reps that taught timing, tuning, and how to hold a room captivated. The band some accounts remember was called the Cool Flames, a small, flexible unit that could stretch country tunes toward rockabilly, or rein in a loud room with a ballad. Night after night, Westover learned to live inside the beat and save the high note for when it mattered. Away from Michigan, he wrote letters and planned a future that still felt uncertain. Work by day when he got back, music at night if the work allowed. The Army gave him something he could keep, though: stage discipline and the confidence to lead from the guitar. By the time he returned to Michigan in the late 50s, he was not just a kid who played well, he was a working band leader. The next chapter would begin on a small stage in Battle Creek, where a club called the High Low kept the music going long after the day shift ended. He'd been working by day as a carpet salesman, sometimes a truck driver. But one night at the High Low Club in Battle Creek, a front man was released, and Westover stepped forward to take his place. Briefly, he used the stage name Charlie Johnson. He renamed the outfit the Big Little Show Band, a nod to how a small group could fill a room. He learned the art of pacing, open strong, hold the dance floor, and save one last surprise for the final set. The music world was shifting fast. In 1957, American Bandstand went national, turning after-school TV into a daily showcase for youth culture and top 40 singles. Teenagers became a market the industry now organized itself around. Elvis had already made it big. Then, in 1959, a small plane crashed near Clear Lake, Iowa, killing Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. A shock that seemed to close one chapter of early rock and roll history. That same year, and into 1960, congressional hearings on payola scrutinized radio's ties to record labels, rattling the business and the DJs who helped break new sounds. At the same time, the New York's Brill Building approach, professional writers crafting songs for a youth market, was gathering strength. In clubs like the High Low, bands covered everything. Country-leaning numbers, doo-wop ballads, rockabilly shuffles, even the new assembly line pop built for radio. Westover paid close attention to what held a crowd and what didn't. Also in early 1959, a keyboard player arrived in the band who changed the sound of everything. Max Crook. He brought with him a custom instrument he had built himself and called the Musitron. It was built from an old claveline and scavenged parts. That strange bending tone turned heads in the club long before it ever reached a studio. By 1960, Charles Westover had the habits that would carry him. Show up early, lead from the guitar, and write whenever you had an idea. The next step, new name, new city, was close. But for now, it was Battle Creek, the High Low, and a band that sounded bigger than it was. Adding the Musitron had changed the band's arrangements. Where a saxophone or a guitar would normally take a break, Crook's tone cut cleanly through bar chatter. One night, the group tried a 2-chord idea, just A minor to a G, and felt the entire room lean in. By morning, Westover had lines scribbled on a pad at the carpet outlet. As I walk along, I wonder. Back at the High Low, they played it that night, and when Westover pointed for a solo, Crook answered with the now famous Musitron break. Regulars would ask for the song 4 to 5 times a night. Soon word of that sound reached Ann Arbor, and a DJ named Ollie McLaughlin. He came to hear the band at the High Low, made tape recordings, and carried them to Detroit impresarios Harry Bulk and Irving Michniff. This is how Barroom Songs began the trip to a label in 1960, through the hands and ears of a trusted local DJ. The first New York session still lay ahead, but inside the High Low the pieces were now in place. A disciplined band, a strange new keyboard, and a song that could pull a room toward the stage. The next step was to see if it could pull a city. In late January 1961, Del Shannon and keyboardist Max Crook drove with the rest of the band from Michigan to Bell Sound Studios in New York, the kind of room where pop hits were made fast and efficiently. Sources most often list the session date as January 21st, though Mix Magazine's reconstruction has the pair arriving on January 23rd and loading in the next day. They had 3 hours to get 4 songs: Runaway, Jody, The Snake, and The Wanderer. Back in Detroit, producer Harry Bulk thought Shannon's vocals sounded a little flat. Rather than scrap the take, he used Bell Sound's custom Verispeed to speed the vocal up, nearly 1.5 steps by his recollection, until the pitch locked. Shannon balked. "That doesn't sound like me." But Harry Bulk answered, "Nobody knows what you sound like." On release, the record moved tens of thousands per day. Runaway shipped on February 18, 1961, and within weeks climbed to number 1 in the US and then the UK. By the time the single shipped in mid-February 1961, Charles Westover was performing under a new name, Del Shannon. Del he had derived from the Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and Shannon he had borrowed from a club regular's pro wrestling name, Mark Shannon. On April 10, 1961, Shannon sang Runaway on Dick Clark's American Bandstand, 2 weeks before the song reached the top of Billboard's Hot 100. The TV push put a face to the voice that was already climbing radio playlists. For the week of April 24, 1961, Runaway was number 1 in the United States, and it held for 4 weeks, and it soon reached number 1 in the UK as well. That spring, a song born on Michigan bandstands was everywhere. The follow-up single had to come fast. Hats Off to Larry was released in May of 1961.
I won't even look at her.
Hats off to Larry, he broke your heart, just like you broke mine when you said we must part.
Another minor key rocker with a sharp hook and that decisive, uplifted vocal. It entered the Billboard Hot 100, stayed 13 weeks, and peaked at number 5. In the UK, it reached number 6. In Canada, it topped the CHUM chart. In Australia and New Zealand, it made it to number 2. The pace was relentless. Travel, radio rooms, quick TV spots, package shows, then back to the next city. Del Shannon was 26 years old, carrying a voice that now belonged to the country and trying to write between sound checks. Buried in the track list was his early cut of Marie's the Name, his latest flame, months before Elvis Presley would make it a hit. For Del Shannon, fame felt like walking on a moving sidewalk. In a single season, he'd gone from Battle Creek to national stages, from a barroom original to 2 major hits. The next challenge was to hold the spotlight long enough to decide what kind of artist Del Shannon wanted to be. By early fall, the 3rd single was ready. So Long, Baby kept the clipped rhythm and the edge in his voice. It reached number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100 and made the UK top 10 by December. For a singer barely off the club circuit, 3 radio records in 1 year meant the schedule would not slow down. Labels wanted quick follow-ups and steady visibility. Managers pushed for tours that fed the next single. For Del, that meant riding in transit and trusting the same instincts that carried him out of Michigan. Throughout the year of 1962, Del Shannon faced 2 different charts. In America, the singles grew smaller. Jenny in the Mirror stalled on the fringe. Cry Myself to Sleep peaked below the top 90, and momentum had slowed. In Britain, the story flipped. A Roger Miller tune with a yodeling hook, The Swiss Maid, climbed to number 2 and stayed on the charts for months. The UK audience also met Del Shannon in the cinemas. In Richard Lester's 1962 pop review, It's Trad, Dad, released in the US as Ring-a-Ding Rhythm, Shannon appears performing You Never Talked About Me, alongside British and American names of the moment. As 1963 opened, Little Town Flirt was the record that stuck. In the US, it rose to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. In Britain, it climbed to number 4 and held for weeks, proof that Del's tight hooks and lifted, urgent vocal still cut through noisy airwaves. That spring, Del heard a new song from a Liverpool group sharing the bill at the Royal Albert Hall. He cut From Me to You within weeks, the first Lennon-McCartney composition ever to chart in America, peaking at number 77 on the Hot 100, while the Beatles' US release missed. Across early 1964, US radio changed fast. On February 9th, the Beatles played Ed Sullivan. More than 73 million people watched. An event that helped kick the British invasion into place on American charts. Del Shannon kept releasing new sides as the tide rose. In Britain, Mary Jane made the top 40 in March 1964. In the US, his cover of Handyman climbed to number 22 that summer, proof he could still cut through crowded playlists. That October, he issued the Handyman LP, new label, new slate of material, while British acts multiplied on US radio. His answer arrived in November. Keep searching, we'll follow the sun. Minor key glide, urgent lyric, high release at the end, Shannon's signature had sharpened.
No one will understand what I've gotta do. I've gotta find a place to hide with my baby by my side. She's been hurt so much, they treat her mean and cruel. They try to keep us far apart. There's only one thing left we can do. We gotta keep searching, searching, find a place to hide, searching.
It became his final U.S. top 10 hit, peaking at number 9 on the Hot 100. In the UK, it rose to number 3 at the start of 1965. Amid a wave of new British names, Keep Searchin' showed there was still room for Del Shannon's voice. Fast, focused, and built for radio, another chapter waited just ahead. Spring of 1965 American charts were crowded as bands like the Rolling Stones and Herman's Hermits began to join the Beatles. Del's record still cut through, but for fewer weeks and at a lower peak. Stranger in Town would prove to be Del Shannon's last U.S. top 40 of the 1960s, but it set the tone for how he'd carry himself through a shifting era. Write it himself, sing it hard, and keep moving. The next years would ask him to reinvent himself again. Offstage, Del Shannon was still Chuck Westover, married young to Shirley and already a father. Photos from home show the ordinary scenes he missed on the road. Craig, Kim, and Jody piled into the frame, while their father wrote set lists at the kitchen table. The tug of being a working singer and a present parent never really let up. Even in the churn, he made time for others. In late 1964, he produced a demo session for a young Bob Seger, a quiet act of Midwestern solidarity from an artist who remembered how hard the first door is to open. Homesick and underslept, Del Shannon cut a Hank Williams tribute, music from Saturday night radios in Coopersville. More like a letter home than a strategy. Whatever the charts said, it was personal. A reminder of the voice he first fell in love with. His move to Los Angeles promised proximity to studios and a reset. The reality was rougher. New rooms, the same paperwork, and the old ache of missing birthdays. Those closest to Del recall a man who could be the life of the room, or very quiet. An up and down that loved ones later framed as the strain behind his smile. Out of that period came something inward-looking. The album, The Further Adventures of Charles Westover. The first time that his given name shared the cover. It's Del, but it's also Chuck. As the 1970s began, numbers were down, but Del Shannon was still taking every gig he could find and calling Shirley and the kids back home after the last autograph had been signed. A December 1972 recording became the album Live in England in 1973. Evidence that an audience across the Atlantic still met him with open hands. In 1975, Del Shannon co-founded Bug Music in Los Angeles. Their first job was to administer Del's songs and chase down what he was owed. But the stress of all of it had begun to get to him, and there'd been a developing alcohol problem. But in 1978, he made a hard promise to himself. Del joined Alcoholics Anonymous and quit drinking. Friends and later accounts mark it as a clean break that steadied his days and gave him back his mornings. On the business side, the fix he'd started in '75 kept paying off. With Bug Music administrating his catalog, money missing for years began to find its way home. He wasn't rich, but the paperwork finally evened out. Around this time, a younger fan turned into an ally. Tom Petty, who'd grown up on Runaway, brought the Heartbreakers in to back Del and produced a full album, tracking across 1980 and 1981. The project felt like a vote of confidence from a new generation. After some delays, Drop Down and Get Me landed in December of 1981. A comeback statement with Petty at the board and the Heartbreakers in the band. The single, Sea of Love, gave him a last sweet chart climb. Number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1982. Proof that the steadier life he'd built could still carry a song all the way across the country.
Bad scene.
Here she comes, little town girl, falling for her, but you're gonna get hurt. I know it's so hard to resist the temptation of her tender red lips, but you can get hurt. You can get her hurt.
But his home life was more difficult. Accounts from the period say that Shirley, his wife since the 50s, left in 1984. And by 1986, the two divorced, after more than 30 years. He married Bonnie Leanne Tyson later that same year. Friends in Western Michigan recall how quickly she became part of the life around the music. It's noted that she joined him on the road during the late 1980s tours. On the creative side, the late 80s ended with a real invitation. Mike Campbell, Tom Petty's guitarist, and Jeff Lynne opened a studio lane for a new Del Shannon record. Recording sessions rolled across 1989 and 1990, with Campbell producing and Lynne contributing and co-producing. By early 1990, the album, titled Rock On, was nearly finished. But on the night of February 8th, 1990, Del Shannon, Charles Westover, 55 years old, died by suicide at his home in Santa Clarita, California. Deputies reported a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His wife, Bonnie, found him just after 11:25 p.m. in the den. They found no note. Accounts after his death say that amid stress about working on the album and touring, Del had began taking Prozac in late January of 1990. The following year, his widow filed suit, alleging the drug contributed to his death. Grief traveled fast through two circles: family in West Michigan, and the musicians who'd rallied to his comeback. In the weeks ahead, those friends would decide what to do with the songs he'd just left behind. His friends finished what he started. With Mike Campbell producing and Jeff Lynne co-producing, the posthumous album Rock On was released in October 1991 on Silvertone. Contributors included other members of the Heartbreakers, with Tom Petty appearing on guitar and backing vocals. In 1999, Del Shannon was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a formal recognition of a writer-singer who'd shaped radio in 1961 onward and kept writing and working across 4 decades. Back home, the legacy stayed local and lived in. Scholarships, an annual Coopersville car show, community memories, and national too, in every band that still includes Runaway in their set. The record he didn't live to see, Rock On, is how the story ends and how it keeps playing. After a life of rock and roll, devoted to songwriting, chasing that perfect sound, the perfect song, his last album is one last message to young musicians and young hearts everywhere. Rock on.